In the summer of 1970, the United States launched a test missile from Utah bound for New Mexico. Instead, it landed in Old Mexico. And if firing a missile during the Cold War into a neighboring country wasn't bad enough, the missile contained a radioactive element that could have been used to make nuclear bombs even worse. Friends, welcome to the Mysteries of Latin America podcast. For those of you here for the first time, my name is Andrew, and what I do here is tell stories of the myths, legends, mysteries, and history of Latin America, from Mexico to the southern tip of Argentina and the islands of the Caribbean. I do it so that people like me with roots in the region know some of our stories, and so that people who don't do too, and know a little more about what makes up at least a part of our cultural DNA. I invite you to subscribe on whatever platform you're getting us on here, and to share it with other like-minded adventurers. Now, full disclosure, this podcast episode wasn't originally about a military exercise gone wrong, resulting in a missile carrying nuclear material landing in a neighboring country. This podcast was originally about an area of Mexico called La Zona del Silencio, the Zone of Silence, a mysterious place in the Mapimí Desert in Chihuahua where radios and cell phones don't work, compasses spin wildly, and people have reported strange lights in the night sky, spurring reports of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. But while I was researching the phenomenon of the Zone of Silence, I started finding information on a missile crash in that area. And once I dug into that story, it took center stage. We'll circle back to the Zone of Silence angle, though, as I feel that has a lot to do with how the real story was handled. Now, let's get to the story. The date was July 11th, 1970. Athena missile number 122 was launched from Green River, Utah, in the middle of the night, bound for the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. After a malfunction, though, the rocket went way off course and headed south across the border. Radars lost contact with it, and it disappeared over the horizon. To make things worse, the nosecone of the missile contained a payload, 2 small vials of Cobalt-57, a radioactive element. To say that it could have set off an international incident with Mexico would be an understatement. Would it be handled out in the open, or would it be handled discreetly, especially in the middle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union? The Athena missile was fired from Utah as part of an Air Force program put together to serve as a model or simulator for what we would later know as ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, long-range missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads across continents. ICBMs are potent weapons in America's defense strategy, meant to deter potential threats and safeguard national security. Their possession and deployment globally have a profound impact on international relations. And throughout the Cold War, the presence of ICBMs heightened tensions between the US and the Soviet Union, creating a delicate balance of power under the threat of mutually assured destruction, which significantly shaped the dynamics of global politics for decades. Athena 122 launched at 2:40 in the morning, destined for the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. According to personnel monitoring the launch and flight at White Sands, the first part of the launch went exactly as it should during the first couple of minutes. At some point during re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, they lost contact with the missile's systems. Now, communications blackouts weren't uncommon with this type of a mission, as the intense heat surrounding the missile frequently hurt transmissions. So, they went outside to take a look with their own eyes, looking for the fiery glow of the rocket to make re-entry over the New Mexico range. While they did see a glow, it wasn't headed their way like it usually was. It kept going south, way south. Evidently, the 4th stage of the rocket fired before the 3rd one, and it threw it out of its scheduled flight path. When they started getting data from the missile again after the brief blackout, they used it to aim their radars. And then it disappeared over the horizon. They would need that data later to try to predict where it went down and under what conditions. And then everyone's phones blew up. The U.S. would be going to Mexico. Early reports and data indicated that the missile crash site should be somewhere in a mountainous region about 150 miles south of El Paso, Texas, in central northern Chihuahua. A man named Carlos Bustamante, who was a project engineer and had worked on Athena and was now at the missile range in New Mexico, got a call in the middle of the night to pack his bags. He would be headed south of the border, as he knew the launch site, the missile range, the missile, and he spoke Spanish. He would need it, as he would represent the U.S. government and explain to Mexico what happened and why, and the details of that radioactive payload. A small team, including Bustamante, headed down, and to make sure information was under control, Bustamante was the only one allowed to talk to Mexican authorities about the incident and what would come next. The 150 miles south of El Paso on the U.S. border, based on new data, turned into 450 miles south-southwest, somewhere between the borders of the states of Durango and Chihuahua. Part of the team flew down in 2 small rented private planes, and others drove down in vehicles and set up their base at Torreon, capital of the state of Coahuila. By their estimates, they'd be done in about 4 days. The team met up with Mexican military officials and scientists, and Bustamante and his staff kept working their numbers to come up with a crash site based on the data they received from the missile, and figured it would be somewhere in the desert near a small town called Ceballos, about 100 miles away. The team performed organized searches by air in their small rented plane for days, and they even stopped on roads and pastures to talk to ranchers and get answers and see if anyone had seen anything unusual that would point them in the right direction. And for days, they got nothing. Finally, on August 2nd, 23 days later, a specially equipped airplane sent from the U.S. by the Atomic Energy Commission that was calibrated to detect Cobalt-57 detected the radioactive material on a flyover of what was left of the missile's nosecone. When Bustamante and his team finally found the site, they found a small crater, some twisted metal fragments, and some contaminated sand. What the nosecone contained was 2 small vials containing pellets of Cobalt-57. The official story is that the radioactive material was there to measure the performance of the heat-resistant materials on the outside of the missiles. Cobalt-57 is also an isotope used to enhance radioactive fallout in what are called salted bombs. Salted bombs, including cobalt bombs, are designed to maximize radioactive contamination and are considered highly dangerous due to their long-term environmental and human health impacts. The use of weapons like these would likely be considered a war crime under international treaties and laws due to the indiscriminate suffering they cause. But the official story is that the radioactive material was there to measure the performance of the heat-resistant material on the outside of the missile. At the site, both Mexican and American scientists got to measuring radiation and reported that levels were at, officially, 0.6 millirems per hour, which according to the scientists was very low by their standards. Now, the American Nuclear Society estimates that Americans are subjected to anywhere from 26 to 96 millirems a year, depending on their elevation, and that radiation normally comes from sun exposure. Now, the nosecone debris and the cobalt was all they found of the missile, and they never found the 3rd and 4th stages of the rocket. As reported radiation levels were low, the plan was to fill the hole where they'd removed the contaminated sand, they would say adios, and everyone would go home. Funny thing about plans, though. A couple of days later, officials and radiological teams and higher-ups from both countries' governments got involved, and they arrived. There was disagreement between the 2 countries as to the correct acceptable levels of radiation at the crash site. Mexico wanted lower levels. After weeks of negotiation, the U.S. agreed to send down personnel and equipment from the U.S. to remove most of the contaminated soil and bury another less contaminated amount. To do this, though, Mexico required that the U.S. send its earth-moving equipment and any other machinery by train, and they were to remove any military markings from the machinery. To not draw too much unwanted attention about another country conducting a military operation in Mexico. Operation Sandpatch had begun. On September 24, 1970, a 16-car train arrived at Carrillo, Mexico, about 20 miles from the crash site, equipped with sleeping cars for the men and their machinery. Using their earth-moving equipment, they made a road from the train to the crash site, and then they used the same equipment to remove contaminated soil. In total, they removed 79 55-gallon drums of soil and contaminated clothing and safety gear. Soil that was measured to be at extremely low levels was buried in trenches nearby. And when they thought that they were finished, the Mexican government had a surprise for them. Since their agreement was for them to remain a little while longer, they had to stay. They were not allowed to leave the country. So, the team, which by that time had made a few friends in town, decided to repave some of the town's dirt roads, repair a river dam that serviced the town, and worked on its water system before leaving. They left on October 5th, after 12 days in Mexico. And not long after, the legend of Mexico's Zone of Silence, la Zona del Silencio, began. One legend, or myth, or conspiracy theory, or whatever you want to call it, says that there's a physical anomaly in the area of the missile crash that caused the Athena to come down there, and that the recovery team from the US was actually a group of NASA scientists that came to see what happened, to study the area under the guise of recovering the missile. This alternate story goes on to say that the people from NASA who came to clean up the missile crash site started having strange experiences. Their radios didn't work right, and compasses and electronic equipment they had would work erratically or stop working altogether. But it doesn't end there. Today, besides radio and TV signals going haywire, cell phone service is often interrupted. People have reported seeing strange lights in the sky and UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and people who visit the area often complain of feelings of disorientation, nausea, or unusual sensations. But it's not just humans that are affected. Plants in the area are said to have abnormal growth, unusual colors or sizes that are very different from their counterparts outside the zone. The same's been said about insects, birds, and reptiles and amphibians, where they have abnormal coloring or size, anatomical irregularities, like having extra limbs or digits, and even mating and migration habits that are very different from what they normally should exhibit. Since the 1970s, this region of the Mapimí Desert of Chihuahua, roughly 750 square miles in size, has since become a hotspot for both scientific study and paranormal speculation due to these anomalies. The strange happenings in the Zone of Silence have led to many theories about their causes. One idea from scientists suggests that high levels of magnetite, or iron in the soil, disrupt radio and TV signals and even upset radar. They also think that the area's location near the Earth's magnetic equator and interactions with ionized particles from the sun might create these unusual electromagnetic effects. These theories, while plausible, still don't explain completely everything about the zone's mysteries, leaving room for more research and even stranger ideas. One of them is that some people believe that the zone could be a site where extraterrestrials visit or even have a hidden or underground home, pointing to unexplained lights in the sky and sightings of strange creatures. There are even stories of human-like beings with blonde or white hair, definitely not from Earth, who supposedly communicate telepathically with locals in the desert near the town. Others think that the zone's oddities are connected to an energy phenomenon called ley lines, which are imaginary lines believed to connect ancient sites and carry special energies. Supporters of ley lines think that these connections influence the area in unique ways. But what if it's all a way to get us thinking about something that's not missiles flying in the air above us, especially back in the days of the Cold War, when both the US and the Soviet Union were in a technological arms race, trying to get military advantages and bombing technology to assert dominance and strategic superiority. Those legends around the Zone of Silence might be seen as a way to shift focus away from the true story, a U.S. missile test gone wrong. This incident, where the Athena missile veered off course and crashed into the desert, initially drew some attention to the area. Some suggest that spreading mysterious tales could divert attention from discussions about missile testing, nuclear warfare, or environmental concerns. As we've seen, stranger things have happened. The lore has also become a draw for tourism, benefiting local businesses and attracting attention from the media, authors, and scores of paranormal enthusiasts to explore the area's intriguing stories. Well, whatever those stories and theories might say, what we know to be true is this: that in the summer of 1970, a missile crashed in the desert of northern Mexico while carrying radioactive material. A U.S. military operation dubbed Operation Sandpatch was carried out to clean things up and patch things up with America's southern neighbor. And it was all done quietly and fairly covertly, and the rumors, stories, and legends about an unusual area of desert exhibiting magnetic, extraterrestrial, biological, and even paranormal phenomena has become the bigger story. So why did I include this story about missiles over Mexico's zone of silence in the Mysteries of Latin America vault of podcasts? Well, the anomalies alone initially made it interesting enough for me. But the real story for me lies in, how do we not know more about the story of a missile shot from the U.S. that crashed in Mexico while carrying radioactive material? Once I knew that part, I knew I had to learn the story and tell it here on the podcast. So what do you think, friends? Is the area really another Bermuda Triangle of magnetic activity? Or does someone want to take advantage of our gullible natures and curiosity? Let me know in the comments or drop me an email. And if you have a suggestion for a story about the myths, legends, history, or mysteries that have happened or are happening from Mexico to Argentina and in the Caribbean, drop me a line at andy@andycancun.com. That's andy@andycancun.com, and I'll be glad to see what you've got. Friends, thanks again for listening. I invite you to subscribe and follow this podcast and share it with anyone you know who might enjoy a story that helps people know a little more of what makes Latin America, Latin America. My name's Andrew Colon, and from Cancun I say adios.